Hey there. I know why you're here. You're looking for a story that will help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Something calming, a little mysterious. Something that carries your mind away. Well, you've come to the right place. Before we begin tonight's journey, do me a little favor. Tap the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Even just a good night. It really helps more sleepy souls like you find their way here. Now, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let's begin tonight's story. She thought she had it all figured out. He was kind, he was stable, and most importantly, he had money. What began as a smile turned into manipulation. What started as love was a lie in disguise. She used him for comfort, for convenience, for survival. But life has a way of balancing the scales. This is not just a story about greed. It's a story about what happens when you take love for granted, and how sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself. She used him for money, but life made her pay. Keep watching, because this isn't just a story, it's a warning, and the twist is one you won't forget. She met him on a quiet Sunday afternoon, but it wasn't the kind of meeting that stories romanticize. There was no magical coincidence or spark of destiny, no whimsical twist of fate. It was deliberate, calculated, and coldly pragmatic. She had seen him a few times before, always at the same local grocery store. There was something about him, not flashy, not loud, just steady and dependable. The kind of man who carried himself with quiet dignity, who smiled politely, who stood alone in the checkout line, carefully arranging his groceries, paying with exact change. He was the sort of person who didn't demand attention, but gave off a calm energy that drew others in. She needed someone like that. She leaned casually against the aisle, as if she'd accidentally wandered there, browsed the apples, then reached out to touch the fruit he had picked up. "It's hard to find good apples these days," she said softly, her voice light but with just enough vulnerability. He looked up, surprised but friendly, and smiled. "Yeah, they don't make them like they used to." It was a simple exchange, but that smile, the kind that didn't hide behind walls, was exactly what she wanted to see. A laugh escaped him, warm and easy, and she knew then that he was the kind of man who believed in the goodness of people, who paid his bills on time, who opened doors for strangers, who trusted before he was burned. She introduced herself, giving a name that wasn't hers, safer that way. He told her his, genuine and unguarded. He offered to buy her a coffee, and she said yes, stepping into a new life. In the cafe, she studied him like a book she'd read before, but wanted to memorize every word. His hands were strong, worn by years of hard work, but clean. His watch was modest, but well cared for. The kind that told you he wasn't flashy, but valued things that lasted. He spoke about his job, accounting, steady income, no risky ventures, no drama. A man grounded in numbers and predictability. She smiled in all the right places, laughed softly at his jokes, and nodded when he talked about his favorite books, classics she pretended to know. She told him she valued stability, honesty, and peace. When he walked her home that evening, he hesitated before gently taking her hand. She let him, savoring the warmth. That hand would be her anchor. Over the next few weeks, she perfected her role. She became the dream partner, the one who seemed caring, vulnerable, just enough to need comfort, but not so broken as to be unlovable. She cooked once, a simple meal, but enough to impress. She let him see tears she didn't feel, moments of fragility that drew him closer. He bought groceries, paid cab fares, wrapped his jacket around her shoulders on cold nights. She told herself it wasn't wrong. He was offering. He wanted to help. She was just surviving. Life had never handed her anything freely. She learned early that no one saves you unless you know how to take what you need. And so she took. His apartment was neat but plain, a small refuge with no luxury but good taste. A bookshelf lined with worn volumes, a dusty guitar propped in a corner, framed photos of a past he rarely spoke about. He wasn't rich, but he was enough. He shared stories of his childhood, raised by a single mother who struggled but never gave up. She listened carefully, not because she cared, but because knowledge was power. She learned where his heart softened, where his wounds still bled. He asked about her life, and she gave him a story, a survivor's tale filled with hardship and resilience. Jobs lost, people who hurt her, nights spent alone in cold rooms. She played the part perfectly, broken enough to be pitied, yet strong enough to inspire love. He told her she was strong, deserving of better, and that he would be different. And so she moved in, not officially, but slowly, 2 nights a week, then 4. She brought a bag, then a suitcase, then her shoes found permanent spots in his closet. The apartment became theirs. He paid for everything: rent, food, clothes, phone bills. She pretended to look for work, showing fake emails, making excuses about the economy. He told her, "Take your time. I've got us." She smiled, but inside she laughed. She didn't want to work. Not yet. Why would she? She had warmth, safety, full meals, a man who adored her without questions. He gave her a life she never dreamed of. Sometimes guilt flickered, like a shadow in the corner of her mind, but she chased it away. She remembered the men who left, the landlords who raised rent, the jobs that fired her. This was survival. He called it love. He started talking about the future, a home, marriage, maybe kids. She changed the subject, saying she wasn't ready, had trauma to heal. He understood. Still, he never stopped giving, and she never stopped talking. As the days blurred into weeks, her confidence grew. What began as careful steps towards survival became a habit of taking without looking back. The boundaries between her needs and desires, between truth and pretense, began to dissolve. She got bolder. At first it was small things, extra groceries she didn't need, but that made her feel more alive. Fancy snacks, chocolates, candles, knickknacks for the apartment she now called home but never truly felt belonged to her. She justified every indulgence in her mind. He can afford it, he wants to give. I deserve a little happiness. She started ordering packages online, things that arrived in glossy boxes, wrapped in ribbons and plastic, makeup kits she had never worn before, bags that whispered promises of glamour, kitchen gadgets she never unpacked. He never protested. When a package arrived, he only raised an eyebrow but paid the bill without hesitation. Once he asked softly, "Do you really need another purse?" She smiled sweetly, kissed his cheek, and whispered, "It makes me feel pretty." That was all it took. He never asked again. Her days followed a predictable rhythm. She'd sleep late, scroll endlessly through social media, watching other people's perfect lives unfold in carefully curated images. She reposted, filtered smiles and inspirational quotes about strength and gratitude, building a facade that looked nothing like the quiet desperation inside. But there was no real gratitude, no real strength, and the love, if it existed at all, was just a costume she wore for his benefit. When he came home from work, she played her part flawlessly, attentive, sweet, interested in his day. She laughed at his jokes, asked about spreadsheets and meetings she had no interest in. She left him little notes, handwritten snippets she copied from online quotes, tiny reminders of how much she appreciated him. "You're my peace in a loud world. I feel safe when you're near." He cherished those notes like treasures, folding them into his wallet, reading them when he thought she wasn't watching. He told her once, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't know what I did to deserve you." She smiled and nodded, but inside, she felt nothing. The mask had grown comfortable, too comfortable. She had built her life on lies, and he had built his world around her. But like all fragile things, that world was made of glass, and cracks were beginning to show. It started slowly, a lost client here, a delayed payment there. The economy shifted, and his steady income began to waver. He said nothing at first, but she noticed the subtle changes, the way he lingered over bills longer, the deepening lines around his eyes, the tightness in his jaw when he thought she wasn't looking. He stopped ordering food. Instead, he cooked more at home. Lentils, eggs, rice bought in bulk. He told her it was for health, for saving money. She sensed the truth, but said nothing. Panic grew inside her chest. This wasn't the plan. She started dropping hints, casual, indirect. "Maybe we should look for a cheaper place," she suggested one evening. "Or you could ask your family for help. Maybe even take a second job." He smiled, tired but steady, and said, "I'll figure it out." "Don't worry," she worried. Not about him, about the life she'd grown used to losing grip on. When the bills piled higher and the cupboards grew bare, she reached out quietly to old acquaintances, sending texts she never expected to answer. A few replied, most didn't. She felt more invisible than ever. One evening, with her voice low and urgent, she asked him for cash, $a few $100s. "It's for a friend in trouble," she lied. He frowned, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. "Who? What kind of trouble?" She snapped back too quickly. "Why don't you trust me?" His face crumpled, hurt and confused. "It's not that. I just forget it." She cut him off, turning away. But that night, she saw him counting money carefully in the bedroom, slipping bills into an envelope. The next morning, he placed it silently on her dresser. She didn't thank him, she just took it. And then she took more. The debt began to creep in like mold, slow, silent, ugly. He tried to hide the stress at first, but she saw it. The way he stared at receipts with weary eyes, the sighs he tried to swallow, the growing distance behind his smile. One afternoon, she overheard a hushed phone call, whispers about deferred payments, extensions, borrowing. Her stomach churned, not because she cared about him, but because she feared the ride might be ending. She needed a backup plan. That night, she told him she wanted to visit her cousin in another city for a weekend. "Just to clear my head," she said softly, hoping he wouldn't ask too many questions. He nodded, as always supportive, handing her train fare with a tired smile. She packed a small bag, but not just clothes. She slipped his old iPad inside, some cash she had taken from his drawer, and a few pieces of jewelry she knew he'd forgotten he owned. She left early the next morning without a goodbye. She wasn't going to her cousin's. She was meeting a man she'd been chatting with online, a flashy type who promised nights of fine dining and escape. To her it was an opportunity to upgrade, a chance to reclaim some of the life she felt slipping away. But it took only one night for reality to hit. The new man was charming in texts, dismissive in person. He made her pay half the dinner bill, made biting comments about her age, her looks, her expectations. By morning, he was gone. So was her dignity. She returned 2 days later, cold and humiliated. She didn't want to see the man she'd left behind, but she had nowhere else to go. She rehearsed her story: cousin emergency, missed trains, no signal. But when she opened the door, the apartment was dark, too dark. He wasn't there, and neither were her things. The apartment felt cold and empty. Silence echoed through the rooms where once laughter and whispered promises had lived. She stood in the doorway, clutching her bag, her heart pounding in a way she hadn't felt in months. Not from excitement, but fear. He was gone. All the little signs had been there, but she hadn't seen them. The late nights, the phone calls he'd take in another room, the way he'd stare out the window, lost and tired. She had been too wrapped up in her own survival to notice that the man who had once adored her was quietly slipping away. She wandered through the apartment, eyes landing on the things she had taken for granted. His worn guitar resting against the wall, the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter, the empty fridge, the notes she'd left him, now crumpled on the floor. She touched the envelope he'd left on the dresser, the one filled with money she had taken and spent without a thought. Regret hit her like a wave, not because she cared about the bills or the money, but because in losing him, she had lost the fragile warmth she never knew she wanted until it was gone. She searched his bedroom and found a note taped to the mirror. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. I hoped you'd stay, but I see now that what I gave wasn't what you wanted. I'm tired, and I can't keep giving to someone who only takes. I hope someday you find what you're really looking for. The words stung, but they were true. She sank to the floor, the weight of loneliness crushing her. For the first time in years, she felt the hollow ache of emptiness, not the kind that could be filled with money or gifts, but the kind that demanded something real. Her phone buzzed, a message from the flashy man she'd met days ago. Don't call me again. She deleted it. There was nowhere else to go. Her pride kept her from calling her family. She hadn't spoken to them in years. She wasn't sure they wanted to hear from her anyway. The only home she had was the apartment that wasn't hers anymore. The night stretched long and cold. In the darkness, she thought about the choices she'd made, how she had used a man's kindness as a shield, a stepping stone, a way out of a life she hated. But in doing so, she had blinded herself to the quiet love that had tried to grow beside her. She remembered his face, the hopeful eyes, the soft laugh, the way he'd held her hand as if it was the most precious thing in the world. Tears came, unbidden and hot. She wished she could tell him the truth, that she was scared, that she didn't know how to be anything other than what she had become. But the silence answered her back. Days passed. She stayed with friends for a while, crashing on couches, avoiding calls from people who asked too many questions. She sent vague texts. I'm okay, just busy. But she wasn't okay. Not really. Her phone battery died one afternoon, and she realized she hadn't eaten all day. Hunger gnawed at her, sharp and real. She walked to the grocery store, buying the cheapest bread and canned beans. Sitting on a park bench, she ate slowly, thinking about how far she'd fallen. That night, she called her mother. The voice on the other end was cautious, tired. Why now? Her mother asked. I'm sorry, she whispered. I need help. Her mother hesitated, then said, Come home. We'll figure it out. The journey back was long and quiet, the cityscape giving way to familiar streets and faded memories. She looked out the window, heart heavy, but a small flame of hope flickering inside. At home, her mother met her at the door with tired eyes and open arms. There was no judgment, only a quiet acceptance that spoke louder than words. Days turned into weeks. She took small steps, finding work, cleaning houses, volunteering at the local shelter, slowly rebuilding the life she had shattered. Each day was a battle against old habits, against the pride that whispered lies of self-worth, measured by what she could take. He was never far from her thoughts. One afternoon she found herself at a cafe, staring at the window. A man walked by, older, kind eyes, a little worn from life. She thought about him, the one she had used, and for the first time, she felt something she couldn't name: gratitude. Not for the things he gave, but for the love he tried to share, for his patience, his hope, his quiet sacrifice. She realized she didn't want to be the person who used others to survive. She wanted to be the person who gave back, who loved honestly, even if it meant risking everything. That night, she wrote a letter, not to him, but to herself. I'm sorry for what I did. For the lies, the taking, the silence. I'm learning how to be better, how to love without fear, how to be grateful for what I have, not just what I want. I'm ready to live with truth, even when it's hard. She folded the letter, sealing it in an envelope she never sent, because this story wasn't about forgiveness from others. It was about forgiving herself. Time moved slowly, like a hesitant river, winding through unfamiliar territory. Each day was a small victory. Each night, a quiet reckoning. She was learning how to live with the scars she had carved into her own heart. The ones no money could buy away, no charm could hide. Returning home wasn't a fairy tale. It was raw and awkward. The house was smaller than she remembered. The walls holding whispers of old fights and laughter long faded. Her mother was there waiting with open arms, but the air between them was thick with unspoken years. Forgiveness was not immediate, but the slow thawing of ice. She took a job cleaning houses in the neighborhood, a humble work that required sweat and humility. The money was small, barely enough to save, but it was honest. And it was hers. She found that in working hard, in facing the mundane truth of bills and chores and quiet evenings, a strange kind of freedom began to take root. Not the freedom of careless spending or empty pleasures, but the freedom that comes with owning your mistakes and still trying. At night, she lay awake and thought of him, the man whose kindness she had used without mercy. How many nights had he stayed up, worrying about the future? How many bills had he deferred, so she could keep pretending? The guilt was a heavy, unwelcome companion. One evening, she sat down with a pen and paper, the ink trembling under her fingers. She wrote him a letter, long overdue. Not a plea for forgiveness, but an honest confession. I used you. I took more than you ever gave. I hid behind lies and fear. You deserved better than the woman I was. I'm sorry. I don't expect anything, but I want you to know the truth, and that I am trying to be better. She folded the letter carefully, not knowing if she would ever send it. Weeks passed, and life pressed on. She rebuilt relationships with old friends who had quietly wished her well, even when she had disappeared. She returned to the shelter she once volunteered at, this time as a helper, not a seeker. In giving, she discovered pieces of herself she had lost. Her pride, Once a shield that protected her from asking for help softened. She realized pride could be a prison. Then one unexpected afternoon, her phone buzzed, an email notification. She opened it, heart pounding, and saw his name in the sender's field. "I got your letter," it began. Her breath caught. It took me time to process everything. I was hurt, angry, confused, but more than anything, I was sad. Sad that we lost what could have been. I don't have all the answers. I don't even know if I'm ready to meet again. But I want you to know that I'm proud of you for reaching out. That takes courage. The words were simple, but they stirred something deep inside her, a fragile hope. Over the next few days, they exchanged messages cautiously. He spoke about his own struggles, losing his job, the loneliness of an empty apartment, the hope that maybe, someday, things could be different. She told him about her new job, the small apartment she had found, and the hard work of mending her life. There was no rush, no grand declarations, just two people, broken in their own ways, trying to find peace. One evening, they met at the same cafe where it had all begun months ago. The air between them was charged with the ghosts of the past, but also with something new: respect, understanding, and a tentative forgiveness. He smiled, a little shy, and she returned it with a warmth that felt genuine. They talked about everything and nothing, about dreams deferred, about what it means to love and to lose, about the cost of pride and the power of sacrifice. She realized that the story wasn't about greed or manipulation anymore. It was about human frailty, about how we sometimes hurt those we love most because we don't know any better, and how, sometimes, life gives us a chance to pay our debts, not in money, but in kindness, forgiveness, and love. As they parted that night, she felt lighter, not because the past was erased, but because she had finally faced it, because she had chosen gratitude over bitterness and love over fear. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to walk it honestly. Life has a way of balancing itself, often in ways we don't expect. After months of raw honesty and slow healing, the illusion of comfort had finally shattered. But with the breaking came clarity, and with clarity came a harsh truth she hadn't fully faced to truly rebuild. She needed to confront not only her past actions, but also the deeper wounds that had led her there. The first step was acceptance, the heavy, stubborn kind that doesn't just settle on your skin like a coat, but burrows deep, rearranging your thoughts, your beliefs, your very sense of self. It was easy to blame circumstances, to paint herself as a victim of a hard world, but accepting that she had made choices, selfish, reckless, cruel choices, was a different matter altogether. She sat at her small kitchen table one grey morning, the rising sun struggling through the blinds. A notebook lay open before her, blank pages waiting. Writing had become a quiet therapy, a way to sift through the tangled mess inside her head. She wrote without stopping, letting the words flow like a confession about her childhood. The chaos, the neglect, the feeling of invisibility, about the nights spent alone, wondering if anyone would ever care, about the hunger for something more, something stable, something safe. Then she wrote about the man she had used, his kindness, his hope, his heartbreak, how she had taken and taken, never giving back, how pride had blinded her and fear had silenced her. By the time she finished, the page was filled with messy, uneven handwriting. a testament to a mind struggling to untangle itself. Later she read it aloud, the words heavy but cleansing. In that moment, she understood something vital. Forgiveness was not a gift given by others, but a journey inward towards self-compassion. Yet, self-forgiveness was not easy. Old habits and thoughts whispered lies, that she was worthless, that she'd never change, that she was destined to repeat her mistakes. But each day she chose differently. Each day she took small steps toward kindness, to herself and to those around her. Her job cleaning houses was tough. Early mornings, long hours, and often invisible work. But there was dignity in it, something grounding. The women and men she met in those homes shared pieces of their own stories, struggles, hopes, failures. She listened, and slowly, a fragile connection formed. One client, an elderly woman named Mrs. Reynolds, became a quiet mentor. They shared tea after work, talking about life, loss, and the small joys that kept them going. Mrs. Reynolds told her, "You can't rewrite the past, but you can write the next chapter with grace." Those words echoed in her mind. Despite the progress, loneliness lingered, the kind that even company couldn't fully erase. She realized that her hunger wasn't just for money or security, but for genuine connection and belonging. Her mother's house, once a place of refuge, also bore reminders of fractured family ties. Conversations were careful, polite, avoiding deep wounds that still throbbed beneath the surface. One afternoon, her mother sat beside her with a worn photo album. "You know," she said softly, "we all carry mistakes, but family means trying, even when it's hard." The words touched a part of her that had been closed off for years. She began reaching out to her siblings, hesitantly at first, unsure if they wanted to hear from her. Some ignored her messages, others responded with cautious warmth. Slowly the cracks in the family's walls started to mend, brick by brick. But the hardest truth remained. The man she had used was still in her thoughts, still part of her healing. Their occasional messages had grown into cautious meetings, short coffees, walks in the park. Neither rushed, both wary. One evening they met at a quiet bench, overlooking a river. The city lights twinkled behind them, reflecting in the water's calm surface. He looked at her with tired eyes but smiled gently. "You're different," he said. She nodded, feeling the weight of that statement, not just on his lips, but inside her. "I've had a lot of time to think," she continued, "about who I was, what I did, and who I want to be." He reached out, his hand brushing hers. "We all have chapters we wish we could rewrite, but it's the ones we choose to write now that matter." For the first time, she believed him. Over the next weeks, their fragile friendship deepened. They shared stories, not the polished, perfect versions, but the raw, unvarnished truths. They talked about fears, dreams, and the scars that shaped them. She learned that love wasn't just about receiving, but about giving, even when it hurts. And he learned that forgiveness could be a beginning, not an end. Yet, beneath the surface, she battled an old demon, the fear that she wasn't worthy of this second chance, that sooner or later, she'd slip back into old patterns. One night, lying awake, she stared at the ceiling and whispered, "I want to be better." But how? The answer didn't come immediately. But slowly, through small acts of honesty and sacrifice, the path revealed itself. She started volunteering more at the shelter, helping others who were lost like she had been. She saved every penny, dreaming of a future where she could stand on her own 2 feet. She wrote letters to people she had hurt, not expecting replies, but needing to acknowledge the pain she had caused. She spoke openly with her mother and siblings, rebuilding trust with patience, and she nurtured the delicate bond with the man who had once been her lifeline, not as a safety net, but as an equal partner in the journey toward healing. One cold morning, she stood before a small group at the shelter, sharing her story for the first time. Her voice trembled but didn't break. "I was lost," she said. "I used people because I didn't know how to ask for help. I thought survival meant taking, not giving. But I've learned that real strength is in vulnerability, in love, in sacrifice." The room was silent, but the eyes that met hers held respect and understanding. In that moment, she felt the weight of truth settle like a quiet relief. The past could not be undone, but the future was hers to write. She was no longer running from her mistakes. She was facing them, and in facing them, she was beginning to live. The days that followed her sharing at the shelter marked a subtle but profound shift within her. It was as if a heavy curtain had been pulled back, revealing a light she hadn't dared to look at before. Speaking her truth aloud gave it weight. Yes, but also relief. A strange freedom in vulnerability. She returned home that evening, her mind swirling with thoughts and emotions. She sat quietly in the dim light of her small apartment, reflecting on the journey that had led her here. The mistakes, the pain, the manipulations, all of it felt like distant echoes now. Though the lessons remained deeply etched into her heart, she realized that healing was neither linear nor tidy. Some days were filled with hope, others with despair. But what mattered was the choice to keep moving forward. Her phone buzzed. A message from him, the man she had once used, but who had never stopped caring. "Dinner tomorrow. There's a new place I want to try. No pressure, just us." She smiled, a soft warmth blooming inside. She replied, "I'd like that." Their dinners were no longer about pretense or manipulation. They were about connection, about rediscovering each other as flawed but striving people. He shared his struggles with job insecurity. She opened up about her fears of being abandoned again. Trust was being rebuilt, slowly but steadily. One evening, as they walked through the quiet streets, he stopped and looked at her. "You know," he said, "for a long time I felt broken by what happened between us. But now I see it as a turning point. Not just for you, but for me too." She nodded, grateful for his honesty. "Sometimes," he continued, "life breaks us to make room for something new." That idea settled deep in her chest. Meanwhile, her family ties, once frail and tentative, began to strengthen. Phone calls became weekly rituals, then daily texts. She attended family dinners, awkward at first, but growing warmer with each visit. Old wounds didn't vanish, but they began to heal with patience and forgiveness. Her mother, though still guarded, expressed pride quietly. "I see you trying," she said, one afternoon, reaching out to hold her hand. That's what matters. She began to understand that love within a family wasn't about perfection, it was about acceptance. At work, the routine cleaning jobs became less of a chore and more of a purpose. She found satisfaction in small things: a polished countertop, a grateful smile, a thank you from a client. It wasn't the glamorous life she once imagined, but it was real, tangible, and her own. One day, while cleaning the home of a young couple expecting their first child, she overheard a conversation about the struggles of parenthood. The couple spoke honestly about fears and hopes, about the sacrifices and joys to come. It stirred something deep within her. Memories of the man's hope for a family surfaced, the dreams he had quietly shared during their earlier days. She thought about the future he once imagined, and wondered if she could ever be a part of that future, not as a user, but as a partner. The idea scared her. The past felt like a shadow she could never fully outrun. Yet, the possibility of genuine love, built on honesty and sacrifice, began to feel real. One rainy afternoon, as she sat with him in a quiet cafe, she decided to speak the truth she had kept hidden. "I've been scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Scared that I'm not worthy of love, that I'll mess it up again." He reached across the table, taking her hand gently. "We all carry scars," he said, "but scars don't define us. What defines us is how we choose to live with them." She let the tears fall, not from weakness, but from relief. That moment marked another step in her transformation, facing fear instead of fleeing from it. But change was never easy. Old habits lurked in the corners, tempting her with the familiar comfort of lies and deceit. One evening, a message popped up on her phone, a request for money from an acquaintance she barely knew. The temptation to slip back into old patterns was strong, but she resisted. Instead, she replied honestly, "I'm sorry, I can't help." It was a small act, but to her it felt like a victory. She began setting boundaries, not just with others, but with herself. No more taking what wasn't freely given. No more using people as means to an end. The man noticed the difference. "You're stronger than you realize," he said one night, as they sat on a park bench watching the stars. She smiled, feeling a quiet pride. Together they started making plans, not about money or convenience, but about building a life rooted in trust. They talked about moving to a new neighborhood, maybe adopting a pet, perhaps even talking about marriage someday. The future felt uncertain, yes, but for the first time it felt hopeful. And with hope came gratitude, not just for what they had, but for the hard lessons that had led them there. One afternoon, she visited the local library and found a book on gratitude and forgiveness. She read passages aloud to herself, savoring the wisdom. "The hardest part of forgiveness," one passage said, "is learning to forgive yourself." She closed the book, feeling its truth settle within her. Her journey wasn't over, but she was no longer afraid of the road ahead. She knew she would stumble, but she also knew she could rise, because this time she was not alone. She had found something precious, a chance to rebuild not just her life, but her heart, and that made all the difference. The days turned into weeks, and her transformation continued, not in grand gestures, but in steady, small decisions that revealed a growing sense of integrity. She no longer sought validation through manipulation or attention. Instead, she worked hard to become someone she could live with when the lights were off and the house was quiet. Still, ghosts of her past didn't vanish. They lingered like smoke in the corners of her life. One evening, she ran into a familiar face at the local grocery store, a woman she used to know during her years of scheming and shortcuts. Her name was Jasmine, a friend turned competitor in the delicate art of survival. Jasmine had once helped her plot lies, fake job interviews, and sweet-talk unsuspecting men. They used to laugh at how easy it was to play the game, but that was another lifetime. Jasmine approached with the same old confidence, her smile lacquered and her eyes sharp. "Well, look who's living the domestic dream," she said, tossing a bag of chips into a cart. "I thought you'd moved on to richer prey by now." Her stomach tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "Things change," she replied. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "So what's the new hustle? Or are you actually playing house with that accountant guy?" "I'm not playing anything," she said. "I'm just trying to live right." Jasmine smirked. "Right. And I suppose next you'll be telling me you found Jesus and a gym membership." She didn't argue. What was the point? Old friends didn't always understand new paths. Instead, she said, "Take care of yourself," and walked away. The interaction haunted her for days, not because Jasmine was right, but because part of her feared she was. Who was she, if she wasn't manipulating someone? What value did she bring, if not her charm or survival instinct? That night, lying next to the man who had once been her victim and was now becoming her partner, she stared at the ceiling and whispered, "Do you think people really change?" He turned toward her, voice soft in the dark. "I think people who want to change already have." That answer filled the room with something warm and still, but life wasn't done testing her. A few days later, she received a call from a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then answered. A man's voice spoke, calm, polite, and vaguely familiar. "Is this? I believe you once went by the name Maya." Her heart skipped. She hadn't used that alias in years. "Who's asking?" "My name's David. Well, I think we met under unfortunate circumstances. You dated my brother. His name was Leonard." She froze. Leonard had been one of the first men she used. Kind, successful, lonely. She had taken advantage of his trust and walked away with several $1,000s and a broken promise. She hadn't thought about him in ages. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I don't know why you're calling me." David sighed. "Leonard died 6 months ago. Suicide." Her chest caved in. "What?" "He left a note," David continued. "He mentioned a few names. Yours was one of them. I'm not calling to blame you. I'm calling because I wanted to understand. He changed after you, became withdrawn. He stopped believing in people." She sat down on the floor, the phone trembling in her hand. "I didn't mean to." "I believe you," David said, "but intention doesn't undo impact." The call ended with no resolution, just silence. She sat in that silence for hours, tears drying on her cheeks. That night, she told the man everything about Leonard, about David's call, about the guilt threatening to drown her. He listened as he always did, then said something she didn't expect. "You can't rewrite the past," he said, "but you can honor it by doing better now." So that's what she tried to do. She volunteered at a local shelter, not because it made her feel good, but because it humbled her. She helped organize clothes, served meals, listened to stories that mirrored her own, stories of pain and desperation and longing. She stopped looking at her life as something owed to her. She started seeing it as something she was building from scratch. Her relationship deepened, not with grand gestures, but with quiet consistency. They cooked together, took walks, fought sometimes, but always made it right. And then one evening, as they sat watching a storm roll in, he turned to her and asked, "Do you ever think about having kids?" The question was gentle, without pressure. She didn't answer right away. The truth was, she had thought about it, late at night, in the moments when the world felt quiet and her body ached with longing. But the thought of raising a child terrified her. What if she passed on her worst traits? What if her history became her child's inheritance? "I don't know if I'd be a good mother," she said at last. He reached for her hand. "You already care more than most do." That's a good start. She smiled, the idea warming her slowly, like sunrise on skin. But fate wasn't done with her story. One afternoon she got a letter in the mail, a legal notice from the city, an unpaid fine from years ago, a court date. It was a reminder that the past, though forgiven, sometimes required reconciliation. She sat him down and showed him the letter. "I'll handle it," she said. "This is my mess. I want to clean it up." And she did. She stood before a judge, explained herself honestly. She didn't make excuses. She took responsibility. The judge reduced the fine, gave her a payment plan. It wasn't easy, but it was fair. As she walked out of the courthouse that day, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: pride. Not the pride that comes from fooling someone or getting away with something. The kind of pride that grows when you finally face what you once ran from. Later that night, she and the man walked by the river, the city lights dancing on the water. "Do you think the universe gives second chances?" she asked. "I think," he said, "the universe gives you the tools. What you build is up to you." She squeezed his hand, a smile playing on her lips. For the first time in years, her life didn't feel like a scam. It felt like a story. A real one. Imperfect, honest, earned, and she was finally ready to write the next chapter. The weeks rolled by quietly, the rhythm of their life settling into a harmony. Neither of them dared disturb. She woke up early now before him. Sometimes she'd make coffee, or just sit by the window in silence, watching the neighborhood stretch into the day. There was peace in the simplicity of it. For the first time in years, she felt grounded, not by wealth, not by manipulation, but by something far more elusive: purpose. Still, the past never truly goes away. It waits in shadows, watching. One morning, a letter arrived. It was handwritten. No return address. The paper was thick, slightly yellowed, like something from another time. Her name was on it, her real name. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The letter was from her mother. It had been nearly a decade since she last heard from her. 10 long years since she packed a duffel bag, walked out of that cramped, angry house, and swore never to look back. Back then, all she knew was survival. Her mother was never cruel, but she was broken, bitter, and indifferent. Love in that house came in rare flickers, and silence was often louder than any scream. "I don't know if this will reach you," the letter began, "but I've spent years thinking about the last thing you said to me. You were right. I never knew how to love you properly. I didn't know how to love myself either." Each word seemed to press on an old bruise. "You deserved better, and I'm sorry. I've been sick lately. It's nothing dramatic, just age, mostly. But it made me think of all the things I never said. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. No judgment, no questions, just a mother, hoping her daughter's still out there, doing better than she started." There was no address, just a phone number. She folded the letter carefully and stared at it for a long time. When he got home that evening, she told him, "I got a letter today from my mother." He paused, unsure. "Do you want to talk about it?" "I don't know," she said truthfully. "I think I want to scream, or cry, or run, or call her, all at once. Then do what your heart says, not your history." That night, she dialed the number. It rang 5 times before a soft, gravelly voice answered. "Hello?" She almost hung up. "It's me," she said, voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause, then a sob. "Baby." They talked for an hour, then 2. It was stilted, awkward, But real. Her mother didn't offer explanations or excuses, just honesty. She talked about the mistakes she'd made, the anger that lived in her bones, the years lost to regret. They didn't fix everything in one call, but something cracked open. Forgiveness didn't come as a grand declaration. It came in small silences, in the fact that she didn't hang up, in the fact that she said, before they ended the call, "Maybe we can try again." Afterward, she sat quietly on the couch, the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the room. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. She nodded. "I think I just took back a piece of myself." That weekend, she visited her mother. The house was older, quieter. There were signs of wear and age in everything, from the peeling wallpaper to the slow way her mother moved. But there was also something softer in the air. They sat at the kitchen table, where she once learned to pour cereal and spill secrets. Her mother took her hands across the table. "I know I don't deserve anything from you," she said. "But if you'll let me, I want to know the woman you've become." She didn't respond right away. "I'm still figuring her out myself," she said, with a small smile. When she returned home, she cried in the shower. Not out of pain, but from the overwhelming feeling of release, like shedding a second skin. Days later, another thread from her past tugged at her door. An email from someone she never expected, Leonard's brother, David. "I've been thinking about our conversation," it said. "I know it was hard to hear, and maybe it wasn't fair to drop it on you like that. But I want you to know, I don't hate you. My brother's pain wasn't just about you. It was about a lot of things he never shared with us. You were part of his story, but not the whole book. I hope you're doing better, and I hope you're making him proud, wherever he is." She stared at the screen for a long time. Then she wrote back, "Thank you for your grace. I don't deserve it, but I'm working every day to become someone who might. I won't forget him." She meant it. As her life continued to shift, the cracks in her heart started to heal. Not completely. Some things never go back to what they were. But healing isn't perfection, it's movement. She began journaling again, not as a way to escape, but as a way to understand herself. Pages filled with reflections, confessions, and questions that didn't always have answers. One night, as she and the man sat together watching an old film, he turned to her and said, "You know, I think I'm falling for you again. For the new you, the real you." Tears welled in her eyes. Not because she didn't believe him, but because for the first time, she believed in herself too. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I," he said, "but that doesn't mean it's not worth it." And in that moment, she understood something she never had before. Love wasn't a currency to be traded, or a power to be wielded. It was a mirror, one that reflected both your light and your shadows, one that dared you to show up fully, flaws and all. That night, she wrote in her journal, "Redemption isn't something that happens to you, it's something you choose. Again and again and again. I'm choosing it, even on the days I feel like I don't deserve it." The next morning, she woke early again, made coffee, watched the sunrise. She no longer needed the world to applaud her transformation. She just needed to keep walking it, one honest step at a time. The air was different now. It wasn't just the seasons shifting, though the early signs of autumn were everywhere. Cooler breezes, shorter evenings, and the warm amber of the trees outside their apartment window. It was her. Something inside her had changed. There was a steadiness to her now, a rhythm built not on illusion but on effort. Each morning she woke with intention. Each evening she rested with quiet reflection. But life, as it often does, doesn't let us forget where we've been. It started with a call she didn't recognize. The number was unfamiliar, out of state. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something nudged her to pick up. Hello? There was a pause. Then a voice she hadn't heard in years. Lena, her real name again. She froze. It's Carlos. Carlos. The name crashed through her like thunder in a chapel. She hadn't spoken to him since before Leonard, since before she abandoned that version of her life. Carlos was the first man she ever truly manipulated, and perhaps the first man who ever truly saw her for what she was back then. He wasn't calling to threaten or beg. I'm not here to drag up the past, he said, his voice softer than she remembered. But I heard about what happened, Leonard and everything. I just wanted to say, I hope you're okay, and that you're finding peace. She didn't know what to say. Her throat tightened. I don't expect a response, he continued, but I figured maybe the woman you've become deserves to hear this. I forgive you, and I hope you've forgiven yourself too. Click. He hung up before she could answer. She sat there, phone still to her ear, the dial tone humming like a requiem. She hadn't thought of Carlos in so long. He had been a chapter she ripped from the story of her life, thrown into the fire without regret. But now the ashes were drifting back, reminding her that no page ever burns completely. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay beside him, her partner, the one who had seen her transformation, feeling both blessed and haunted. She had done so much work to become this version of herself. But forgiveness, that was something she hadn't fully understood until now. The next morning, she woke early, sat at the table, opened her journal. What do we do with the parts of ourselves we wish never existed? She wrote. Do we bury them, apologize for them, or hold them with compassion? She didn't have an answer yet, but she was ready to ask the question. A few days later, an unexpected opportunity came. At the community center, where she had begun volunteering on weekends, a guest speaker cancelled last minute. The director, an older woman named Miss Joy, approached her. Would you be willing to speak to the group this Friday? It's a small one, just a few young women. Many of them are going through hard transitions. I think your story could mean something. Her story, the old her, the part she tried so long to forget. She hesitated. I don't know if I'm ready. Joy smiled gently. Maybe they don't need the polished version. Maybe they just need the truth. That Friday, she stood in front of 5 young women seated in a small circle. None of them knew her history. None of them knew her pain. But somehow, she knew theirs. She spoke slowly at first, hesitantly, but soon the words poured like water, finally freed from a blocked dam. I used to lie to survive, she began. I used people. I wore masks that suited the moment. I said I love you when I meant I need you. And I said I'm okay when I was anything but. The room was silent. I hurt someone deeply, she said, her voice cracking. Someone who gave me everything without asking for anything in return. And when it all came crashing down, I thought it was the end of me. But it wasn't. It was the beginning. Tears welled in one girl's eyes, and another leaned forward, arms crossed tightly, but gaze fixed. I didn't deserve a second chance, but I got one, and every day since I've tried to live a life that honors the one I betrayed. She looked at their faces, not judging, not pitying, just listening. And if I can walk through the fire and come out with a soul that still hopes, maybe you can too. When she finished, no one applauded, but that wasn't the point. One of the girls, a quiet one with a scar above her eyebrow, stood and hugged her, just like that. No words. It was the most honest moment she had ever experienced. Later that night, as she told him about it, he held her hand and said, "I wish Leonard could have heard you today." She smiled through tears. Maybe he did. Weeks passed. The leaves outside had fallen, covering the sidewalks like forgotten confessions, and slowly she began to understand what true redemption was. Not a moment, not even an apology, but a choice. A life lived forward. A love lived honestly. She got a call from her mother one night. "Do you remember Mrs. Rivera down the street?" her mother asked. "She passed away last night, peacefully, in her sleep." She did remember. A cranky old woman who always wore robes and smelled like peppermint tea. "She left a note for you," her mother added. "Said she used to watch you walk past her window every day as a teenager. Said she prayed you'd find peace someday." She blinked back tears. Even strangers had been hoping she'd make it. Sometimes the world roots for us, even when we don't know we're playing. Later that month, she stood in front of a mirror, dressed simply, no makeup, hair pulled back. Her eyes were older, wiser. Her hands no longer reached for things that weren't hers. Her heart no longer saw love as a transaction. She picked up her pen again and wrote, "This is not the end of my story. It's just the chapter where I finally speak in my own voice. No lies, no costumes, just me." It was a strange thing how the smallest changes made the biggest waves. After the community center talk, word spread in the quiet, reverent way that real stories do. A counselor approached her after a volunteer session and said, "They keep asking when you're coming back." She hadn't thought her words would matter, but they had, and that frightened her as much as it warmed her. She had lived so long in shadows, whispering falsehoods to herself and others, that being seen now felt both freeing and fragile. Like standing in sunlight after years of darkness, beautiful but blinding. "Are you ready to lead a session next month?" the director asked over coffee one morning. She hesitated. "Lead? You already are. You're just waiting for someone to tell you it's okay." She smiled faintly. "I guess I never thought of myself as someone people would look up to. Maybe that's exactly why they do." And so she said yes. She began to prepare. Not just her words, but herself. She started waking up earlier, reading more, journaling again. She even signed up for a part-time course on social work. It felt surreal, her taking steps towards something, instead of running away from everything. But progress, she'd learned, never comes without resistance. One evening, while going through old drawers, she found an envelope. It was tucked behind notebooks and receipts, its edges worn. It was Leonard's handwriting. She sat down, heart pounding, opened it slowly. "If you're reading this, I want to believe it's because you've changed. I want to believe that part of you, the part I loved, is still alive. I don't hate you. I never did. I was just heartbroken. Not because you took from me, but because you never let me give to the real you. You were always performing, always afraid. But if you're reading this, then maybe, just maybe, you stopped running. And if that's true, I hope you live the rest of your life knowing that someone once saw the real you, even when you didn't. Be kind to yourself. It's okay to start over." She didn't cry right away. She just sat there, letter trembling in her hands, as if the past had leaned down and kissed her on the forehead. Leonard had written this long ago, probably sensing she might find it someday. He knew her better than she ever allowed herself to know him. That night, she lit a candle, not for him, for her, for the girl she had been, for the woman she was becoming, and for the man who had loved them both. Time passed. Leaves gave way to frost. The first snow fell on a quiet Thursday morning. She opened the blinds and watched children playing in the distance. Laughter echoed faintly. Something stirred in her. Hope. A week later, during a community session, she noticed a new girl in the back, hood up, face down, arms folded tight across her chest. After the session, she walked over, offering her a small paper crane she had folded during her break. "What's this for?" the girl asked. "For whenever you forget you can still fly." The girl rolled her eyes, but kept the crane. As weeks turned into months, more women came, more stories spilled. Some darker than hers, some eerily similar, and each time she listened, not as a savior, but as someone who understood the cliff's edge. And then the moment she least expected, her mother showed up. She had called weeks ago, quietly, cautiously, asking if they could meet. It had been over a year since they'd seen each other. Their relationship had always been tense, wrapped in silence and unspoken blame. But now, her mother stood at the back of the community hall, holding her purse like a shield. After the session ended, they sat in the courtyard. "I heard what you're doing," her mother said. "Word gets around." She didn't respond. "You remind me of your father sometimes." That stung. She had never spoken much about him. He'd been in and out of prison, mostly out of her life. Her mother rarely spoke of him, except in whispers of disappointment. But not in the bad ways, her mother continued. "In the ways I once loved him, he had fire, and when he decided to change, he really tried. Didn't always get it right, but he tried." Silence passed between them. "I'm proud of you," her mother said finally. "Even if it took you a while to find your footing, I'm just glad you did." It wasn't a dramatic reunion. No hugging, no sobbing, just a soft reconciliation. The kind that feels more like breath than thunder. But sometimes, that's all you need. Later that night, she sat on the couch, arms wrapped around herself, remembering something Leonard once said. "The best apologies aren't words, they're changed behavior." He was right. The next day, she visited his old apartment building. It had been months since she last walked those steps. The door had a new nameplate now. New residence, new life. She left flowers at the stoop with a small note. "Thank you for being my mirror when I couldn't see myself. I carry your grace with me." And for the first time, she didn't feel like an imposter in her own life. She felt like someone who had built something honest, slowly, painfully, but real. She walked home in the snow, hands cold, heart warm. Tomorrow she would lead another session. She would fold another crane. She would write another page. But tonight she would rest and whisper into the quiet, to no one in particular, "I'm still here, still healing, still learning, and I'm not running anymore." The first letter arrived on a Tuesday, folded neatly, no return address, just her name on the front, in blue ink. She hesitated before opening it, her fingers trembling with an anticipation she couldn't quite explain. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. "I heard what you said at the center last month. My sister was there. She said you talked about shame like it was a thing you could put down, like a coat you didn't need anymore. I've never heard anyone say that before, not without judgment. Thank you for making space for people like us." She sat on the floor for a long time, just staring at the words. They weren't flowery, not poetic, but they were honest, raw, proof that her pain, her journey wasn't just hers anymore. It was shared, and maybe in that sharing, it became something better. In the weeks that followed, more letters came. Some were anonymous, others signed with trembling names. A mother who lost custody of her kids, a young girl hiding her bruises behind long sleeves, an older woman who had spent 40 years in silence after her husband's death. She pinned them to a corkboard in her room, each one a reminder her story mattered. Her scars were not just wounds, they were windows. She was beginning to understand what Leonard meant when he said, "You don't have to be whole to be a light." Maybe brokenness didn't have to mean emptiness. Maybe it could mean transformation. One day, while reorganizing donations at the center, she found an old coat. It was worn but warm, with stitched initials on the inside lining. Alas, her heart skipped. She ran her fingers along the inside pocket. It smelled faintly of sandalwood, and something she couldn't name, something like comfort. Without thinking, she put it on. It fits. She laughed quietly to herself, shaking her head at the absurd poetry of it all. Life had a way of circling back, of folding things into place when you stopped trying to force the pieces. Later that evening, as she left the center, she walked through the park she and Leonard used to visit. The same path, the same crooked bench near the fountain. She sat down, coat wrapped tight, letting memories settle like mist. A small boy was feeding pigeons nearby, giggling each time they pecked the ground. His mother stood a few feet away, watching him with tired but tender eyes. The woman glanced at her and offered a polite nod, and then something unexpected happened. "Excuse me," the woman said, approaching her cautiously. "Are you the woman from the healing sessions?" She blinked. Yes. I speak there sometimes." The woman smiled softly. "You helped my sister. She said you told her it's okay to still love the people who hurt us and still walk away, that it's not betrayal, it's survival." She swallowed hard. "I remember saying that." She said it saved her life. Tears stung her eyes, but she nodded. "Thank you. That means a lot." The woman touched her shoulder gently before walking back to her son. She sat there for a long time. After they left, the sound of the fountain blending with the whispering wind. Her past had once felt like a sentence. Now it felt like soil. Something new could grow from it. But healing wasn't linear, and she was reminded of that the very next week. An email appeared in her inbox. Subject: Leonard's estate. Unresolved matters. Her stomach twisted. She opened it slowly. It was from Leonard's lawyer. He had left behind a small life insurance policy. Not much, but enough to handle his final debts and still leave something behind. She wasn't the only person named in the file. There was also a cousin and a donation earmarked for the local shelter. But he had left her something specific, a letter to the woman who once broke my heart and perhaps saved it too. "You taught me more than I ever expected to learn in a lifetime, and maybe we weren't meant to last forever. But I don't regret you. I only hope you don't regret yourself." This isn't forgiveness, it's freedom for both of us. Take what's left, make it matter. I believe you will. She sat in silence, clutching the screen, tears falling freely now. Not the kind of tears that sting with shame, the kind that cleanse, that soften, that settle like rain over cracked soil. She declined the money, wrote the lawyer back with a single line: "Please send it to the shelter in his name." He would have liked that. The next day she returned to the community center with a new sense of purpose. Not just to lead, not just to speak, but to truly listen. To carry Leonard's legacy, not the money, Not the memory of their time together, but the grace he had shown her when she least deserved it. That night, she found herself writing again, but this time, it wasn't a confession or a letter. It was the beginning of a new program. She called it Echoes of Grace, a support circle for people rebuilding their lives after hurting others. Not victims, not survivors, just people learning how to be human again. The first session was quiet. Only 4 showed up, but by the 3rd week there were 12. By the 2nd month, a waiting list. She had found her place. Not because she had all the answers, but because she was finally willing to live in the questions. And for the first time in years, she stopped flinching when people looked at her with kindness. She started believing she was worthy of it. Sometimes she still missed Leonard, missed the simplicity of his kindness, the way he believed in small things, hot meals, quiet music, slow mornings. But she knew he had given her more than just comfort. He had given her a mirror, and now, finally, she didn't look away. It had been a full year since Leonard's death. She remembered the date not just because of the calendar, but because of the feeling in the air, that strange, pressing quiet that comes when memory and grief sit side by side. The kind of quiet that doesn't need words to make itself known. She stood in the small garden outside the community center, gently patting soil over the roots of a lavender plant. One of the volunteers had suggested they build a memorial patch for those they had lost. It had taken her weeks to agree, and even longer to decide what she would plant. Lavender had always reminded her of him. Soft, healing, subtle. Not loud like roses or proud like tulips. Just steady, present, like he had been. As she planted, the door behind her creaked open. "Sorry to interrupt," came a voice. She turned. It was Angela, one of the newer volunteers. A college student, full of questions and awkward bravery. "There's someone here asking for you. Says he's not sure why." She stood brushing her hands on her jeans. "Okay, I'll be there in a minute." When she walked into the lobby, she stopped short. The man standing there looked out of place, not because of how he was dressed, simple coat, scuffed shoes, but because of the look in his eyes, lost, hopeful, afraid. He smiled, nervously. "Hi, I don't know if you remember me. My name's Caleb." She blinked. The name felt familiar, like a faint echo, and then she remembered Caleb, one of the men she had messaged during her brief, desperate spiral after Leonard had started pulling away. One of the names buried in her old texts, long deleted. They had never met in person, just a few flirtatious exchanges and one uncomfortable phone call. "I remember," she said carefully. He looked relieved. "I figured you might not. It was a weird time." She nodded. "It was." He shoved his hands in his pockets. "I didn't come to stir anything. I actually didn't even plan to come here. I was just walking past, saw the sign outside. Echoes of Grace, and I don't know. Something made me stop." She gestured to the chairs near the coffee stand. "Want to sit?" They sat in silence for a moment. "I've been clean for 6 months," he said finally. "Was in a bad spot last time we spoke. Real bad. I barely remember most of it, but I do remember thinking I didn't want to be alive." Her breath caught. "I found this group online," he continued. "People who write letters to themselves, future selves. It sounds cheesy, I know, but it helped. Made me think past the pain, even if just a few hours ahead." She smiled softly. "It doesn't sound cheesy. It sounds like hope." He chuckled. "Yeah, maybe. Anyway, When I saw your name on the flyer here, I had to come. I remembered the way you talked to me. You were kind, even though I was a mess. I was a mess too, she admitted. He looked surprised. You seemed strong. I was pretending, she said. But I'm not pretending anymore. They sat in the warmth of that truth for a moment longer. Caleb eventually joined the Tuesday night sessions. He wasn't a speaker. Not at first, just watched, listened, occasionally nodded. But one night, he shared a poem he'd written, and when he read the final line, half the room had tears in their eyes. There's grace in the stumble, the bruise, the fall, and sometimes healing is just learning to crawl. The group clapped gently, and she clapped too. This time, not as a leader, but as someone who knew exactly what that crawling felt like. Outside of the center, life continued to unfold slowly, beautifully. She had started working with a local non-profit, consulting on programs for restorative justice. She wasn't proud of her past, but she no longer ran from it. She let it guide her, let it sharpen her awareness, deepen her empathy. She also reconnected with her sister. Their relationship had been silent for years. It wasn't because of a fight. It was the silence that comes when one sibling walks a darker path and the other doesn't know how to follow. But healing had made her brave. She called her one evening, heart pounding. I don't expect anything, she said quickly, before her sister could respond. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything, for disappearing, for hurting people, for lying. Her sister had been quiet for a moment. Then came the words she least expected. I'm just glad you're still alive. The tears came fast and heavy, not because of guilt this time, but because of release. Someone still wanted her. Someone still saw her as family. They met for coffee the next weekend. It was awkward, but real. They talked about their childhood, about their mother's absence, about the way survival sometimes looked like selfishness, about the ways they both had learned to hide pain. And somewhere in the middle of that coffee shop, between two lukewarm cappuccinos, they laughed again, a soft, surprised laugh, like rediscovering a song you used to love. By spring, the community center had expanded. More rooms, more programs, more faces she'd never seen before, each carrying stories heavy with grief and bright with longing. On the anniversary of Leonard's passing, she held a small event in the garden, just candles, music, and stories. No long speeches, just space. She wore the same coat, the one with his initials, and when it began to drizzle, she didn't rush inside. She stood in the rain, eyes closed, breathing deep. Someone approached her quietly. You okay? Angela asked. She nodded. Yeah, I am. Angela smiled. You think he'd be proud of all this? She looked around. The candles, the lavender, the people who had once believed they were beyond saving. I think, she said slowly, he'd be grateful. Angela placed a candle beside her. You know, people still talk about him here, especially the way he forgave. Like it wasn't even a question. Shh, she nodded. It wasn't. That's who he was. They stood together in silence. Later that evening, when most had gone home, she sat under the awning with her journal. She wrote, I used to believe I had to earn love. Then I believed I didn't deserve it. Now I believe love is something you hold, not hoard. Something you give when it hurts. Something that forgives. Something that plants lavender where lies once lived. I was the storm. He was the shelter. But now, I am both. The first real warmth of spring had returned to the city, not just in the air but in the way people carried themselves. There was something softer about the world, something easier. Children laughed louder, old men lingered longer on park benches, and women wore light scarves that fluttered in the breeze, like flags of quiet victory over winter. She sat on the bench across from the bakery Leonard once frequented. The small shop had changed owners, but the window still bore the same faded lettering: fresh bread, fresh starts. She smiled at the irony. Her mornings had become ritual now. Wake up at 6. Meditate, brew coffee, walk to this bench and sit with a notebook in her lap. Not to write anything profound, just to sit, observe, and remember that she was still here, alive. Sometimes she still expected the past to catch up to her, that some forgotten lie would resurface, that someone from another life would show up and say, "You don't deserve this peace." But those voices had grown quieter. Today her notebook was blank, not for lack of words, but because she had started listening more than writing. She noticed a boy watching her from across the street, skinny, about 9 or 10. He was holding a paper bag too tightly, like it might float away. His eyes were alert, cautious. He crossed the street slowly. "Hey," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Hey," she responded, closing her notebook gently. He extended the bag toward her. "I saved the extra. You gave me the token last week. Remember?" She did. He'd come to the community center alone, hungry, quiet. She had given him a food token, not asking questions. She took the bag, opened it. 2 slightly crushed pastries. "For you," he said. Tears prickled behind her eyes. "Thank you." He nodded. "My name's Isaiah." She smiled. "I'm glad to meet you, Isaiah." He hesitated. "Can I sit for a while?" "Of course." They sat in silence, sharing crumbs and sunlight. After a few minutes, he pulled a comic book from his pocket and started reading. She watched him out of the corner of her eye, heart heavy with a strange joy. This was healing, not speeches, not grand gestures, just moments, shared space, trust rebuilt one act at a time. Later that afternoon she returned to the center. The board of directors had offered her a permanent position, program director for community restoration. She was hesitant at first. Leadership still felt too big for someone who had spent so long hiding from herself. But they believed in her, and more importantly, the people believed in her. She walked the halls with familiarity. Now, names and faces attached to stories she held close. Addiction, recovery, grief, redemption. She carried them all, not as burdens but as proof. In the main room, a few volunteers were rearranging chairs. Tonight's session was themed forgiveness and the self. Angela approached her with a clipboard. Full house tonight. Even Caleb's bringing his cousin. She nodded. Let's make space. As the room filled, she took her usual spot near the window. Not in front of the group, but beside them. She didn't lead with ego anymore. She let stories lead the way. The topic opened with a simple question. What does it mean to forgive yourself? A woman named Nora spoke first. 52, former nurse, hadn't seen her daughter in 3 years. "I thought forgiving myself meant forgetting what I did, but it doesn't. It means remembering and choosing to love the version of me who did it anyway, because she didn't know better. And now she does." Murmurs of agreement. Then a man named Darren, ex-con, recovering alcoholic. "I used to think forgiveness had to come from someone else. But what if they're gone? What if they can't give it? I learned to look in the mirror and say, I forgive you, even if no one else ever does." That saved me. Then silence. Then a whisper. I don't know how to forgive myself for being loved by someone I didn't love back. All eyes turned. She hadn't meant to say it out loud. It had just slipped. She looked around. They waited, not with judgment, but curiosity, compassion. I used someone, she said slowly, breath shaking. A man who gave me everything. And I took, lied, manipulated. I told myself I needed it, that it was survival. But I knew, deep down, it was greed, pride, fear. No one interrupted. And then he died. And I realized I'd never get the chance to say I was sorry. A hand reached out. Angela's. But I've spent every day since trying to live in a way that honors him, she continued, trying to give what I used to take. And maybe that's how I forgive myself. Not by forgetting, but by transforming. Silence fell again. But it wasn't heavy. It was sacred. After the meeting, people lingered, some hugging her, others just offering nods of gratitude. Outside, the night had softened. The street lamps buzzed gently, and she walked home slowly, bag slung over her shoulder, heart fuller than it had been in years. At her apartment, small, neat, humble, she took off her shoes and sat by the window. She lit a candle, not out of ritual, but remembrance. Leonard's photograph still sat on the small shelf beside the window. Not because she couldn't let go, but because she didn't want to forget the man who showed her that love wasn't something to earn, but something to receive. She took her notebook and wrote, "Today I was seen, not as who I was, but as who I've become. Today I forgave myself again. Today I lived." Days passed, and the rhythm of her new life settled into a steady cadence, one that felt fragile but promising. The community center became more than a job. It was a lifeline, a place where broken stories intertwined and fragile hopes took root. She spent mornings planning programs, afternoons meeting with volunteers, and evenings hosting group sessions. Every interaction deepened her understanding of the human heart's capacity to both wound and heal. One afternoon, she received a call from a woman named Evelyn, a social worker who had heard about her story through a local support network. "I think you should meet someone," Evelyn said. "Someone who might need exactly what you have to offer." Curious, she agreed. 2 days later, she found herself sitting in a small coffee shop across from a middle-aged man named Samuel. His eyes were tired but kind, and his hands trembled slightly as he sipped his black coffee. Samuel's story was heavy with loss, a recent widow struggling to raise 2 teenage daughters alone. The weight of responsibility pressed hard against his every word. "I've been trying to hold it together for them," Samuel confessed, voice breaking, "but I'm drowning. I don't know how to ask for help without feeling weak." She nodded, recognizing the familiar dance of pride and pain. "You're not alone," she said softly. "We all carry burdens that feel unbearable at times. What matters is finding the courage to share them." Their conversation stretched into hours, each word a bridge between 2 people mending their fractured selves. She saw in Samuel the same vulnerability she once buried beneath layers of defense. In the weeks that followed, Samuel became a regular at the community center, his daughters slowly joining the sessions. Together, they began to rebuild not just their home but their hearts. One evening, as the center emptied and silence wrapped around the worn walls, she found herself alone with Samuel. He looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, perhaps recognition. "You've given us more than you realize," he said quietly. "You've shown us how to hope again." She smiled, the words stirring a warmth that reached places she thought had long turned to ash. That night, She walked home beneath a sky streaked with stars, the cool air carrying the scent of blooming jasmine. She thought about Leonard, about how his kindness, once taken for granted, had planted seeds that now blossomed in unexpected ways. She had come full circle, yet beneath the surface, old fears whispered. Could she truly shed the shadows of her past? Could forgiveness extend beyond herself to those she had hurt? The next morning brought an unexpected visitor, a man with familiar eyes and hesitant steps. He stood at the threshold of the community center, uncertain. It was Leonard's brother. He had tracked her down after hearing stories about her work and wanted to meet the woman who had meant so much to Leonard. The meeting was quiet, respectful. They shared memories, laughter, and tears. The brother spoke of Leonard's hopes and regrets, and she listened, opening a door she thought was forever closed. He asked gently, "Do you think Leonard would have wanted you to carry this weight alone?" "No," she whispered. "He would want me to live, fully, honestly, and with love." Together they made plans to honor Leonard's memory through a scholarship fund for young adults seeking second chances, a gift born from pain transformed into purpose. The days grew longer, and the seasons shifted again. The community blossomed in tandem with her own healing. One evening, after a particularly moving session, she stood outside beneath the fading light, feeling the world hold its breath. A soft voice called her name. Turning, she saw Isaiah, the boy from the park, running toward her, a wide grin on his face. "I made this for you," he said, handing her a folded paper. Unfolding it, she found a crudely drawn picture of a tree, its roots deep and its branches reaching high. "For your new beginning," he said simply. Her heart swelled. In that moment, surrounded by laughter and hope, she understood the deepest truth of all, that redemption is not a destination but a journey, a continuous unfolding of grace, sacrifice, and gratitude, and she was ready to walk it, one step at a time. The months that followed marked a turning point not only in her life, but in the lives of many around her. The community center thrived, fueled by a renewed sense of purpose and hope. The scholarship fund had already helped 3 young people start college, each carrying Leonard's name and legacy with them. She found solace in their stories, in the way their dreams sparkled with possibility. Dreams she once thought were out of reach for people like her. Yet, despite the growth and outward success, the internal journey remained complex. Some nights, when the lights in the center dimmed and silence settled like a soft blanket, memories would stir, echoes of the life she had left behind, whispers of the choices that had shaped her. She had learned to face those memories with less fear, but the scars they left were a quiet reminder of how far she had come, and how easily she could still falter. One evening, a phone call shattered the peaceful routine. It was her mother's voice, shaky, trembling, filled with an urgency that demanded attention. "Your father, he's sick," she said. The news hit like a cold wave. Her father, a man she had distanced herself from, tangled in a web of old resentments and silent absences, was now fragile, vulnerable. She hesitated, caught between the past she had tried to escape and the present that called her back. In the days that followed, she traveled to the small town where she had grown up. The streets were the same, but everything felt different. Smaller, quieter, worn by time. Her father lay in a hospital bed, weakened by illness but still holding on with a stubborn grace. Seeing him there so diminished and human, cracked open a part of her she had long kept sealed. Their conversations were halting at first, tentative steps toward reconciliation. He spoke of regrets, of mistakes made in youth, and hardened by pride. She listened, and for the first time, she allowed herself to forgive not just him, but the years lost in bitterness. Her visit stretched into weeks. She became a bridge between the past and the future, a daughter rediscovering the threads that bound family together. Back at the community center, the team stepped up. Her absence was felt, but the spirit of the mission endured. Friends and volunteers rallied, sharing stories of how she had touched their lives. When she finally returned, there was a quiet celebration, not grand, but deeply meaningful. She carried with her a new understanding that love, forgiveness, and sacrifice were not just lessons in books or stories, but living truths that shaped every breath and choice. The center's work expanded. They began partnering with local businesses to create job training programs, internships, and mentorship opportunities. The scholarship fund grew stronger, fueled by donations and the community's belief in second chances. She found joy in small moments, a child's laugh echoing down the hallway, a young adult proudly accepting their diploma, the warmth of a shared meal after a long day. But perhaps the most profound change was within herself. She learned to cherish gratitude, not as a mask, but as a genuine state of being. Pride softened into humility. Fear gave way to courage. One chilly morning, she stood before a crowd gathered to plant a memorial tree for Leonard. She spoke with a calm strength that surprised even her. Leonard taught me that even in the darkest moments, there is light, in kindness, in forgiveness, in love. This tree is a symbol of that light, of life's enduring hope. As the tree took root, so did her commitment to live authentically, to honor the past without being chained by it, to love without conditions, and to give without expecting in return. The journey ahead remained uncertain, but she faced it with open arms and a grateful heart. She knew now that true wealth was not in money or possessions, but in the bonds we build, the forgiveness we offer, and the love we choose to give. And in that knowledge, she found peace. The first light of dawn filtered softly through the windows of the community center. She stood by the entrance, watching the streets slowly come to life. The hum of early commuters, the faint aroma of fresh coffee from a nearby cafe, the distant laughter of children heading to school. The city, in all its chaos and beauty, was waking up, and so was she. After years of struggle, heartbreak, and hard-earned lessons, she had finally begun to see the horizon clearly. A horizon not defined by what she lacked, but by what she could build. The scholarship fund was thriving. The center was buzzing with energy, and her own heart was opening to possibilities she had never dared to imagine. But with growth came new challenges and new decisions that demanded courage beyond what she had known before. She had been invited to speak at a regional conference on community development, a chance to share her story and the lessons learned from Leonard's legacy. It was an opportunity to inspire others, to bring attention and funding to the center's work, and to step into a role she had never anticipated, that of a leader and advocate. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She spent days preparing, rehearsing her speech, and wrestling with the vulnerability it required. Speaking honestly about her past, the mistakes, the manipulation, the pain felt like opening a wound that was still healing. But she also knew that honesty was the only way to truly connect. The night before the conference, she sat alone in her apartment, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. From the calculated lies and selfish survival to this moment of genuine hope and purpose, it was a transformation marked by sacrifice, forgiveness, and an unyielding determination to change. When she arrived at the conference, the room was filled with faces she had never seen. Social workers, activists, educators, and philanthropists, all gathered to discuss ways to uplift struggling communities. The energy was palpable, the air thick with passion and possibility. She stepped to the podium, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I want to tell you a story about mistakes, about pain, but also about redemption and the power of love," she began. She spoke of Leonard not just as a memory, but as a catalyst for change. She shared the truth of how she had used him, how life had made her pay, and how through that reckoning she found a path to forgiveness, both of him and herself. The room was silent, hanging on every word. When she finished, hands rose in applause, some eyes glistening with tears. Afterward, people approached her with questions, offers of support, and stories of their own struggles. For the first time, she felt a deep connection to a wider community, one that understood pain, but refused to be defined by it. Back home, the conference sparked new ideas. The center could expand its reach, partnering with other organizations to create a network of support for those trapped in cycles of poverty, addiction, and broken trust. She found herself dreaming bigger, but dreams she knew were fragile without action. The following weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, planning sessions, and late nights filled with drafting proposals and coordinating volunteers. She learned to trust others, to delegate, and to lead with both strength and compassion. One afternoon, a package arrived at the center, a donation from an anonymous benefactor who had been moved by her conference speech. The funds were enough to renovate the center's old kitchen, allowing them to start a community meal program. It was a small victory, but one that filled her with pride and hope. As the program took shape, she watched as people from all walks of life gathered to share food, stories, and laughter. The center was no longer just a place of refuge. It was becoming a hub of connection and healing. Amidst the growth, she began to reflect on the personal relationships she had neglected. The bridges she had started to rebuild with Leonard's family needed tending. Old friends long forgotten deserved a chance to know the woman she was becoming. She reached out, sending messages and making calls, hesitant at first, but growing bolder with each step. Some responded with warmth, others with guarded distance. But each interaction was a thread weaving her back into the fabric of community and family. One evening, as she prepared for a board meeting, her phone rang. It was Leonard's mother. "I wanted to thank you," she said softly, "for everything you've done to honor Leonard's memory, for the good you're bringing into the world." Her voice cracked with emotion, tears welled in her eyes. "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without him." They spoke for a long time, sharing memories and hopes. It was a moment of profound connection, a healing of wounds that had once seemed irreparable. As the months passed, her life settled into a new rhythm, one filled with purpose, challenges, and unexpected joy. She met people who inspired her, friendships that nurtured her, and moments of quiet peace that reminded her of how far she had come. One crisp morning, as autumn leaves drifted outside, she stood before the center's newly renovated kitchen, watching volunteers prepare meals for the community. A young mother approached, holding her child's hand. "Thank you," she said simply. "This place saved us." The words echoed in her heart. She smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and responsibility. Her journey was far from over, but now she walked it with open eyes, a humble heart, and a fierce commitment to love, forgiveness, and service. And in that commitment she found the true meaning of wealth, not in money, but in the lives touched and the hope restored. The seasons shifted, and with them came new challenges. The community center's success brought more attention than she had expected, and with attention came scrutiny. Not everyone believed in second chances or in the possibility of redemption. Some whispered behind closed doors, questioning her past, doubting her motives, and even spreading rumors. She heard the murmurs in the market, the cautious glances from neighbors, and the subtle distancing from old acquaintances who once smiled warmly but now looked away. The weight of judgment was heavy, yet she refused to crumble under it. Instead, she chose transparency. At the next town hall meeting, she stood before the community, unafraid to share her story once more. She spoke of the mistakes that had shaped her, the pain she had caused and endured, and the lessons that now guided her path. Her voice was steady, filled with the quiet strength of someone who had looked into the abyss and come back with purpose. Some faces softened, others remained skeptical, but the act of facing the whispers head-on changed the narrative. Slowly, respect began to replace doubt. Meanwhile, the center continued to grow. The community meal program blossomed into a broader initiative, offering job training, counseling, and child-care services. Partnerships with local businesses and government agencies provided funding and resources, allowing the center to reach deeper into neighborhoods where hope was scarce. She became a familiar figure, not just as the woman with a complicated past, but as a leader committed to change. Invitations to speak at schools, workshops, and panels became more frequent. Each time she stepped onto a stage, she felt the old nerves, the fear of judgment and failure, but also the quiet fire of determination. One afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived at the center. It was Leonard's younger brother, someone she had met only briefly years ago. He looked different now, older, wiser, but carrying the same gentle kindness she remembered. "I wanted to see for myself," he said, glancing around, "to understand what you've built." They talked for hours, sharing memories, regrets, and hopes. He told her about Leonard's dreams, the things he never said aloud but carried quietly in his heart. She listened, tears filling her eyes, realizing how much of Leonard lived on in this family. In that moment, forgiveness felt real, not just a word, but a bridge connecting past pain to future possibility. Their reunion sparked a renewed connection between her and Leonard's family. They began attending center events together, their shared grief slowly transforming into collective healing. But life wasn't without its complications. Old habits and doubts still surfaced, testing her resolve. Late at night, she sometimes wrestled with the temptation to retreat into the comfort of isolation, to hide from the messy realities of trust and vulnerability. One evening, after a long day, she found herself alone in the center's empty hall, the silence pressing in. Memories of past betrayals whispered in the shadows. But instead of surrendering to fear, she reached for her phone and called an old friend, someone who had stood by her through thick and thin, who knew her story without judgment. Their conversation reminded her of the strength found in connection, the importance of leaning on others, of shared burdens and mutual support. From that day forward, she made a promise to herself to embrace community, not just in her work, but in her life. As winter approached, the center hosted its first holiday gathering, a celebration of resilience, hope, and new beginnings. Families shared meals, children laughed and played, and strangers became friends. She stood by the window, watching the snow gently fall, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. The path had been long and winding, marked by mistakes and pain. But it had led to something beautiful, a place where broken pieces could be mended, where love and forgiveness were more than ideals, but daily acts. Later that night, as she locked up, a letter slipped under the door caught her eye. It was from Leonard's mother. She read it slowly, her heart swelling with emotion. "Thank you for carrying his memory with such grace. You have turned tragedy into hope. We are proud of you." The words were a balm to her soul. In the weeks that followed, new opportunities arose. A grant from a national foundation promised to fund an after-school program for at-risk youth. A local university offered internships to students wanting to learn from the center's model. She found herself at the helm of a movement, not just a community center, but a beacon of possibility. Yet, amidst the success, she remained humble, grounded in the lessons learned from her past. She knew that pride could blind, and that gratitude required constant practice. She made time for quiet moments, walks in the park, letters to friends, reflections in a journal. One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes, she found a worn photo of Leonard, smiling, hopeful. She traced the edges gently, feeling a wave of bittersweet love. "I wish you could see this," she whispered. "How far we've come." Her phone buzzed with a message. It was from a young woman who had recently found the center, a single mother struggling with addiction and fear. "I don't know if I can do this," the message read. She replied with warmth and encouragement, reminding her that the journey was never easy, but worth every step. As she hit send, she felt the weight and wonder of the role she now held. A guide, a friend, a keeper of hope. Her story was no longer just about what she had taken or lost, but about what she could give. And with that, a new chapter began. The days grew longer, and the community center flourished. But with growth came new challenges that tested every ounce of her strength and resolve. The simple act of helping others soon became a complex dance, balancing limited resources, conflicting opinions, and the heavy weight of expectations. She had imagined this journey to be straightforward: find a purpose, heal the wounds of the past, build something meaningful. But life, as always, proved more complicated. One morning, as she opened the center's doors, she found a crowd gathered outside, a group of parents, some angry, others fearful. They demanded answers. Rumors had spread about the after-school program. Some claimed it wasn't safe, that it attracted troublemakers, that their children would be in danger. The whispers of distrust echoed louder than the cheers of those who believed in change. She stepped forward, calm but firm. "I understand your concerns," she said, "but this center exists to create a safe place, a place where every child can learn and grow. We work closely with counselors, educators, and community leaders to ensure safety and respect." Her words were met with mixed reactions. Some nodded, relieved, others remained skeptical. A man stepped forward, a local businessman known for his harsh views. "You say safety," he said, "but what about discipline? What about consequences? This isn't charity, it's about responsibility." She met his gaze, steady. "Responsibility begins with compassion," she replied. "When we understand where a child comes from, we can guide them. Punishment without understanding only breaks spirits." The debate stretched on for hours. Voices raised, emotions flared. Yet she stood her ground, listening as much as she spoke. By the end of the meeting, a fragile truce was reached. The center would increase its security measures, bring in additional staff, and hold regular meetings with parents. Trust was not won, but the dialogue had started. That night, as she locked up the center, exhaustion settled deep into her bones. She sat alone at the small desk, staring at the paperwork. Grant applications, budgets, schedules, a mountain of tasks, threatening to overwhelm her. The phone rang. It was her old friend, the one who had reminded her of the power of connection. He sensed her wariness. "Remember why you started," he said softly. "This isn't about perfection. It's about progress." His words were a lifeline. The next morning, she rallied her team, sharing the call as encouragement. Together they devised new strategies, workshops for parents, volunteer programs, community events to build bridges. Slowly the atmosphere began to shift. A mother who had been skeptical brought her daughter to a tutoring session. A local pastor offered the center space for weekend activities. A retired teacher volunteered to lead a reading program. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. Amid this progress, a letter arrived, an invitation to a conference on community development in the city. It was an opportunity to share the center's story on a larger stage. She hesitated. Public speaking had never been easy. The fear of judgment, of exposure, lurked beneath her confidence. But deep inside, she knew this was a step she had to take. Preparation consumed the following weeks. She crafted her speech carefully, blending honesty with hope, vulnerability with strength. She practiced in front of mirrors, friends, and even strangers she met in the park. The day of the conference arrived. Standing behind the podium, she looked out at the sea of faces, policymakers, activists, educators, and skeptics. Her heart pounded, but she took a breath and began. She spoke of her past, the mistakes and betrayals that had shaped her. She spoke of Leonard, his kindness, and the lessons he left behind. She spoke of the community center, its struggles and triumphs, the people it served, the future it imagined. The room was silent, captivated by her story. When she finished, applause filled the hall. Some faces glistened with tears. Others approached afterward, offering support, ideas and connections. One woman, a philanthropist known for funding innovative projects, expressed interest in partnering with the center. Another, a journalist, asked to feature the story in a national publication. The possibilities seemed endless. Returning home, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The center was no longer just a local refuge. It was becoming a symbol of resilience and transformation. But with this newfound visibility came new pressures. The philanthropist's grant came with expectations, quarterly reports, measurable outcomes, publicity. The media attention brought scrutiny from those eager to find flaws or scandal. She found herself navigating unfamiliar territory, balancing transparency with privacy, ambition with humility. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of meetings and deadlines, she sat with her journal, fingers trembling as she wrote, "Am I ready for this? Am I enough?" Her phone buzzed, a message from a young woman she had mentored, a mother who had found sobriety and stability thanks to the center. "Thank you," the message read. "You saved my life." Tears blurred her vision. In that moment she remembered why she had started. Not for fame or fortune, but for the quiet lives touched, the small miracles unseen by the world. Her journey was far from over, but she was no longer alone. She had built a family, not by blood, but by choice. And in that, she found peace. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity, growth, and sometimes painful lessons. The community center was thriving in ways she had only dared to dream about. Children who once wandered the streets aimlessly were now showing up regularly for classes, art workshops, and counseling sessions. Parents who had been skeptical now became active volunteers. The ripple effects of hope and trust were spreading, but with growth came growing pains. The fragile balance she had worked so hard to build began to feel like a tightrope walk over a widening chasm. One afternoon, a meeting with the center's board left her drained. The philanthropist's representatives pushed for stricter performance metrics. "We need quantifiable results," they said. "How many kids are reading at grade level? How many parents attend workshops?" These numbers determined continued funding. She understood their point. Funding was lifeblood, but the heart of the center was something that numbers could not always capture. The smiles on faces that had seen too much sorrow, the trust forged in small moments, the quiet victories of a child opening up for the first time. She argued gently, progress is not always measurable in reports. It's in the relationships we build, the safe space we create. The room grew cold. The board members exchanged looks, unconvinced. That evening, as she sat alone in her small office, the weight of expectations pressed down. She wanted to scream, to quit, to run far away. Instead, she pulled out her journal and wrote, "How do you prove love? How do you quantify sacrifice?" But even as doubt crept in, the memory of Leonard lingered, his unwavering kindness, the quiet sacrifices he made without complaint. He had given without expecting, loved without conditions. She made a decision. The next day she called a community gathering, inviting every family, volunteer, and supporter. In the crowded room, she spoke from the heart. This center is not just a project, it is a promise that we will stand together, that no one is alone, that hope is stronger than hardship. She proposed a community advisory council, giving families a voice in decisions, ensuring transparency, and strengthening bonds. The idea was met with enthusiasm. The council brought fresh perspectives, new energy, and accountability. Slowly, trust deepened, weaving the community tighter. At the same time, she faced personal battles. The scars of her past, long buried under layers of survival and ambition, began to surface. One night, after a particularly hard day, she found herself crying alone, the mask slipping. She thought of Leonard, his belief in her, his gentle spirit. She realized that in chasing new horizons, she had never truly forgiven herself for the pain she had caused. Forgiveness was not a destination, but a journey, she understood. One that required courage, humility, and love. She sought out Leonard's family, reaching out with an open heart. They welcomed her with warmth, sharing stories, photographs, memories. In their presence, she found healing, the wounds softening. She began volunteering at a local shelter for families, listening to their stories, offering support, bridging gaps between her past and present. Slowly, the person she had been, the woman who used love as a shield and money as a weapon, began to fade. In her place rose someone new, someone grounded, compassionate, and grateful. One afternoon, a call came from the philanthropist. They had reviewed the latest reports, attended the community meetings, spoken with parents. "We are impressed," the representative said. "Your center is a beacon of hope. We want to increase our support." Relief washed over her, but more importantly, she knew the true success was not in dollars or grants. It was in the lives touched, the hearts healed, the future rekindled. She looked out the window at the children playing in the yard, their laughter bright and clear. This was home, this was love, and she was finally free. Winter arrived quietly that year. Snow blanketed the streets in soft white silence, and for the first time in her life, she didn't fear the cold. The chill in the air no longer signified loneliness or hunger. It was just weather, gentle, calm, beautiful in its own way. The center remained open, its doors a beacon in the bleak season. A furnace warmed the halls, but more than that, the place itself had become a source of heat, a furnace of kindness, compassion, and rebirth. She now woke up early, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She craved the morning stillness, the way the world held its breath, right before dawn. She drank tea, not for comfort, but because it reminded her of discipline. She journaled, read again, prayed in her own way. This was not the woman who had once taken without guilt, who once walked away with money, lies, and a hardened heart. That version of her was now a ghost she occasionally visited, but never entertained for too long. The transformation hadn't been sudden. It was built brick by brick. 1,000 quiet choices, 1,000 swallowed words, 1,000 sorries she never got to say out loud, but whispered into the wind, hoping it might find the one who needed to hear them. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have predicted, was that life wasn't quite done with her. Not yet. One Wednesday morning, she received a call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail, but instinct made her pick up. Hello? A pause. Then, a soft voice. Is this the Hope Foundation? Her throat tightened slightly. That wasn't the center's full name. That wasn't what people usually called it. Yes, she said, cautiously. How can I help you? Another pause. Then the voice returned, trembling. I'm Leonard's sister. My name is Abigail. She nearly dropped the phone. The silence stretched so long that the woman on the other end had to speak again. Are you still there? Yes, she managed, her voice barely a whisper. Yes, I'm here. Abigail sounded older than she remembered. Slower, maybe. She had only seen her once years ago in a photograph Leonard had shown her. She remembered the smile, warm and proud, much like Leonard's. It seemed so long ago. I found a letter, Abigail said, her tone carefully measured. In Leonard's things. He kept everything, you know. Notes, photos, even receipts. And this letter, it mentioned you. The center, what you were doing. Her heart beat faster. I just wanted to see it for myself, Abigail continued. To understand, he talked about you often. A lump rose in her throat. He did? Abigail hesitated. Yes, even after everything, he didn't speak with bitterness, just sadness, like he lost something he hoped would find its way home. She closed her eyes. I wanted to reach out. I wrote to him once. I didn't know where he was. I know, Abigail replied. He read that letter more times than I can count. There was silence on both ends for a long while. Then Abigail said, would it be okay if I visited? She swallowed hard. Yes, of course. They chose Sunday. The center would be quieter. She cleaned the office, made tea, arranged a small tray of snacks, like she was preparing for an interview or a ceremony. When Abigail arrived, she was exactly what she expected, and not at all. Older, yes. Grey hair in a loose bun, but strong, elegant in that quiet maternal way. The kind of woman who didn't waste time with pretenses. They sat across from each other, hands folded on their laps. You look different than I imagined, Abigail said, studying her carefully. I am, she replied. I hope, Abigail nodded. That's what Leonard hoped too. They talked for hours about the past, the lies, the damage, and then about the change, the work, the truth she now lived. At one point, Abigail reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather journal. "He wrote this after you left," she said, handing it over. "I don't know if he meant for anyone to read it, but I think he'd want you to have it now." Her fingers trembled as she took it. The pages were worn, the handwriting achingly familiar. She flipped to a random page and read aloud. "Some people teach you how to love. Others teach you how much you can love, even when it's not returned. She taught me both." Her throat tightened, her eyes blurred. "I never meant to hurt him," she said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Not at first, but I was so lost. And he was everything I didn't know how to accept." Abigail nodded. "He knew he forgave you long before you knew how to ask." They sat together, two women joined by one man's unshakable belief in love. A belief that hadn't died, even when it was betrayed. A belief that had outlived heartbreak. When Abigail left, she hugged her tightly, not out of obligation, but out of shared grief and silent gratitude. And when she returned to her office, she placed Leonard's journal beside the photograph she kept of him. A shrine, not of guilt, but of grace. From that day on, the center changed again. She added a new wing, Leonard Hall, a quiet space for writing, healing, mentoring, a space for reflection. On the wall above the doorway, she inscribed his words, "To be seen and still chosen." Young people passed under that quote every day, some broken, some angry, some just confused. And she met each of them with the same love Leonard once showed her. Not the kind that rescues, but the kind that believes, the kind that waits. One afternoon, as snow fell outside the frosted windows, she sat across from a teenage girl who reminded her too much of herself. Sharp edges, fake confidence, eyes filled with grief she hadn't named yet. The girl said, "Why do you care so much?" She smiled, "Because someone cared about me when I didn't deserve it." And that was enough. Her days began to take on new meaning, not because she had discovered purpose, but because purpose had finally found her, and it wore many faces. One morning, as she opened the doors to Leonard Hall, she noticed a boy sitting on the steps, curled into himself, hoodie pulled over his head. He looked no older than 17, his sneakers soaked through from the melting snow. His hands were red from cold, and his eyes, when he glanced up, were guarded, like a stray dog, unsure whether to fight or flee. "You hungry?" she asked gently. He didn't respond, but he didn't run either. She took it as permission. Minutes later, she returned with a mug of warm tea and a small plate of bread and eggs. She sat beside him without speaking, placing the plate between them. He didn't thank her. He didn't even look at her, but slowly, methodically, he ate. The next day, he returned, and the next. Eventually, he told her his name, Jalen. No last name, no story, just a boy trying to survive. She didn't press, she offered space, warmth, silence. Weeks passed, and Jalen began staying longer. He read books, helped clean up after events, played chess with the old man who came on Thursdays, said little, observed everything. Then one evening, as she locked up, he lingered in the hallway. He spoke quietly. "I know who you are." She paused, keys still in hand. Oh, he didn't meet her eyes. "I saw a video online. Someone made a documentary about what you used to be and what you did to that guy." Leonard. Her breath caught for a moment. She nodded slowly. I figured it was only a matter of time. I thought it was fake at first, Jalen muttered. But it wasn't. She studied him. And now you're wondering if you should still be here. He finally looked up. Why did you do it? She leaned against the wall, folding her arms. Because I was scared. Angry. Tired of being forgotten. I thought the world owed me something. And when I found someone good, I didn't know how to love them. I just knew how to take. He frowned. But you run this place. I do. You help people. I try to. He tilted his head. So, what changed? She paused. Pain, she said. And a lot of it. Pain I caused. Pain I felt. And forgiveness I didn't think I deserved. But someone gave it anyway. Jalen was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You don't seem like the woman from the video." She offered a half smile. "That's because I'm not. But I carry her with me every day." And with that, he nodded and walked off, his hands in his pockets. He came back the next day, and the day after, and months later, when they hosted a community dinner. It was Jalen who stood at the front and welcomed people. Jalen who told his story of running from a home that broke him. Jalen who said, "I never knew people could change until I met someone who did." She cried in the back of the room, but not out of shame, out of grace. Spring arrived like a promise. The center began buzzing again. New volunteers, new programs, new faces full of questions and quiet hope. But no one surprised her more than the man who walked through the doors one rainy afternoon, soaking wet and carrying an umbrella that had clearly given up hours earlier. He looked older, thinner, and tired, but familiar. Her heart stopped. It was Thomas. She hadn't seen him since the day she ran out of the apartment, since the day she left the note and the necklace behind. He was holding a folder, worn at the edges. His hands shook slightly, whether from nerves or cold, she couldn't tell. "Hi," he said softly. She didn't speak. "Not at first. I heard about this place," he said. "From a friend who volunteers here. I didn't know it was you, until I saw the name." Still, she said nothing. She wasn't ready. "I almost didn't come," he added, "but something told me I should." Her voice finally returned. "Why?" He hesitated, then held up the folder. "I never threw away your letter, or the necklace. I didn't know why. Back then, maybe I was angry, or maybe I just wanted to believe that it meant something." She swallowed hard. "I didn't know how to make it right." "You did," he said. "You made this, all of this." He glanced around the center, at the laughter down the hallway, the sound of footsteps, the smell of baked goods from the kitchen. "This place is healing people." She looked at him. "It started because I wanted to heal myself." He smiled, tired, but genuine. "I'm proud of you." She turned away, the tears stinging before they fell. "I don't deserve that." He stepped forward. "You deserve the truth, and the truth is, I never hated you. I just couldn't keep loving you while you were hurting me." She nodded slowly. "I don't expect anything," she said. "I don't want anything from you. I just want to say thank you for loving me when I didn't love myself." He looked down, then back up. Maybe we both had to break to build something better. A silence settled between them, peaceful and painful. "Do you want to see the place?" she asked. He smiled. "I'd like that." They walked together, side by side. Not lovers, not enemies. Just two people who had once shared a story of brokenness, and were now learning how to live new chapters of grace. And in that moment, surrounded by echoes of her past and glimmers of her future, she realized something powerful. The pain hadn't defined her, the healing had, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Thank you for watching this powerful story of redemption, consequences, and the quiet strength that comes from true transformation. If you found yourself moved by this emotional journey, there's so much more ahead. We're just getting started. This is only one chapter in a world full of cautionary tales, life lessons, and raw human stories that reflect the truth behind our choices. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep, dramatic, and soul-stirring documentary. We dive deep into stories that make you feel, think, and sometimes even change. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and stay watching.